In this lecture, we're going to learn how could a woman become a pharaoh in ancient Egypt? So I want you to think back to what life would have been like as a woman in ancient Egypt. And if you recall, you'll remember that we learned that women actually had a pretty good life, especially compared to other ancient societies. They enjoyed a certain level of independence that other societies didn't have during this time. Women could have their own business and could work outside of the home. They could even get a divorce. But we haven't heard of pharaohs being anything but male. So that's the topic that we will explore today. So let's begin our journey here by looking at Thutmose I, who was a male pharaoh. He was the third pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. We are, of course, in the New Kingdom. And he ruled circa, or about, 1526 to 1513 BC. Quick note here. Thutmose and his descendants, sometimes in books and websites, you might see them referred to as Thutmosis, the first, second, and so on. That is referring to the same person. Well, Thutmose I was kind of elderly when he became king, and as you can see, he didn't rule for very long. And early in his rule, he began to make preparations for who would succeed him, who would be next for the throne. Here we have a picture of Thutmose I's mummified body, which, considering that he's like 4,000 years old, he's looking pretty good, I think. Anyways, Thutmose I had only a few children. So first he appointed his eldest son to be the next pharaoh for his first heir, and as the backup, he appointed his second son. Unfortunately, both of those sons died before Thutmose I did. Well, he had no intention of passing the crown on to a trusted friend. He really wanted the kingship to remain in the family. His only living male heir, however, was by a lesser wife. That's right, pharaohs had multiple wives. And so he had the one main royal wife, and then lesser wives. So his only living male heir was by a lesser wife, and he was going to appoint him, but the problem there is it's a lesser wife. So the dynastic ties or the claim to the throne is not as strong. So he had to come up with a plan to make his ties to the kingship more viable. Pause and take a few notes. So Thutmose I, in order to strengthen his son, Thutmose II's, right to the kingship, he has Thutmose II married to one of his daughters, the princess Hatshepsut. So, Thutmose I dies, and Hatshepsut and Thutmose II are now king and queen of Egypt. Pause and take a note. Well, Thutmose II Thutmose II had a lot of health problems, and he was really an unhealthy and sickly person for all of his life. And once he became pharaoh, this was a convenient thing for the new queen, Hatshepsut, because she could take over any or all of his kingly duties for him. And from the very beginning of Thutmose II's rule, Hatshepsut is mentioned as co-ruler in any sort of historical records. So that just shows you she was there right along his side, probably doing a lot more in terms of ruling than Thutmose II was. Pause and take a note. So Hatshepsut and Thutmose II, they did have only one child, and it was a daughter. So they're thinking about the heir to the throne, and you need to have a male. You need to have a son. Well, Thutmose II wasn't really a big fan of Hatshepsut and didn't like her very much. he actually preferred this other woman, Iset, and had several children with her. Now, Iset was never actually a wife of Thutmose II, but with Iset, Thutmose II did have a son, Thutmose III. And so before Thutmose II died, he names Thutmose III as heir, which of course to Hatshepsut was a bit of a slap in the face. Here's this illegitimate child of somebody else who's not even his wife, that is heir to the throne. Pause and take a note. So when Thutmose II died before the age of 35, because he was sickly his whole life, Thutmose III was still a child. So at once, Hatshepsut claimed her right as the baby's aunt and stepmother to rule as his regent. You can see in this statue here we have Hatshepsut sitting down, and if you look closely, it looks like something has been broken off of her lap. Very likely there would have been a small version of Thutmose III as a child sitting in her lap. So this would be showing that he's a child and she is kind of protecting him and guiding him in his rule. Pause and take a note. So for the first few years of Thutmose III's rule, it appears in records that Hatshepsut was supporting him properly as the adult in this role, as his regent and supervisor. But that doesn't last for very long. Sometime around 1500 BC, she started building this huge temple in the Valley of the Kings. Here we have a picture of it. It's Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. And she builds this in honor of Amun-Ra. And some of the artwork that she has ordered the people to make in this temple was a relief or a painting of her mother, and on the opposite wall, Amun-Ra. And the implication of this is that she, Hatshepsut, was actually conceived by the god, meaning that Amun-Ra was her father. Pause and take a note. So Hatshepsut takes this idea that, hey, Amun-Ra is my father, and decides to claim the throne for her own. She's tired of just being the regent for Thutmose III. She wants to be Pharaoh. She convinces the priests and the royal advisors that her father had actually ordered her crowned the ruler of Egypt before his death, which wasn't true, but she just convinces everybody, and nobody really argues otherwise. And she also makes the point that she would be a better ruler than Thutmose III, and everybody just sort of agrees with her. So she's able to claim the throne for herself. You can see here we have a picture of a statue of Hatshepsut as a sphinx. Now, you might notice something weird, that she has a beard here. That's something that all pharaohs would have worn simply as a sign of power. Pause and take a note. So, with Hatshepsut being fully in charge, she's got to figure out what to do with Thutmose III. He's still around, and he's younger, but he still knows it's his right to be pharaoh. So what can she do with him? Well, she sends him off to run the army. He's the head of the army, and so he's going around all over Egypt, driving off different sorts of invaders and things of that nature. And Hatshepsut probably hoped that Thutmose would die in battle. Unfortunately for Hatshepsut, at least, that didn't happen. So, pause and take a note. So, 21 years after Thutmose II's death, Hatshepsut dies. So she has been in charge for about 21 years. And Thutmose III is now well into his 20s, almost 30 years old at the time of Hatshepsut's death. So, as soon as she dies, he returns to Egypt, and he's a little angry. He's upset that his aunt treated him the way she did for so long. He's almost 30, and he's just now becoming full pharaoh. So, he exacts some revenge. He wipes away any place that he could find that mentions Hatshepsut. So her titles were scraped off of every monument he could find. Different sorts of paintings showing that she was the son of Amun-Ra were destroyed. Her statues were thrown into a nearby quarry. He ordered all these obelisks that Hatshepsut had built in honor of Amun-Ra to be for walls to be built up around them so that nobody could see them. He was probably afraid to destroy these obelisks because they were built in order to honor the god, but he at least put up walls so that nobody could enjoy them. So he was pretty angry, and he did what he could to make sure that she was wiped out of memory and that Thutmose III was instead the true Pharaoh of Egypt. There you have it. You know how a woman, Hatshepsut, became the Pharaoh of ancient Egypt.